question. Afterward, each candidate will have 2 minutes each for each question from the audience. So if you have a question, please line up behind this microphone here and address your question to the candidates. At the end of our time, we will have 2 minutes from each candidate for closing remarks. So without further ado, let us begin with the first question, which is again, what makes your plan to defeat Rodney Davis the best plan? And we will start with John Ebel.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Ebel. I teach here at the University of Illinois in the Department of Religion. Before I started working on my PhD at the University of Chicago, I was an intelligence officer in the United States Navy for 4 years. I stayed on reserve duty for 7 years while I was in graduate school. I have lived here in Urbana with my wife and daughters for the last 12 years. My plan to defeat Rodney Davis, I think in its logistics, is going to be a lot like all of the other candidates' plans. Our plans are going to be to run a 14-county strategy, a 14-county race against Rodney Davis, pointing out the many ways in which he has failed us as a community. He has failed us in his votes, he has failed us in his values, he has failed us in his unwillingness to stand before us and hear our concerns. In the 5 years that he's been in office now, he hasn't held a single public town hall in Champaign County, which is, to me, legislative malpractice. If he wants to represent us, he needs to be here representing us. Now, I think that I am the best candidate to go up against Rodney Davis. I think that for a couple of reasons. The first is that I am a new voice in politics. I'm a new voice in the Democratic Party. This is the first time that I've run for office. And in other races, that may seem like it's a liability to some. In this race, I don't think so. There are problems on both sides of the aisle, on the Republican and the Democratic side of the aisle, that have to do with entrenched interests, entrenched politicians who don't want to let go of power. We need new voices. We need new blood in this party. So I'm a new voice. I am also a progressive voice in this race, and I am unapologetically progressive. I do not think that we win races, that we run winning races by running in the center and trying to sound like we're maybe a little bit Republican to peel off those voters who aren't feeling happy with the right anymore. I think that we need to stand. Is that the 15th? Oh, okay, sorry. I thought it was the 6th second. We need to stand loud and proud for progressive values, and that is what I'm going to do. And I know that that is going to be a winning formula against Rodney Davis in November of 2018. Thank you.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, this will mean 15, 10, 5, and then.
My name is Dr. David Gill. I'm an emergency room doctor from Bloomington. I have a wife, Elaine, and 6 children. I am a bold progressive, and I want to thank the people who put this event together today. I'm the grandson of a Jewish couple and spent many Sunday mornings as a child sharing lox and bagels with them, and so it warms my heart to be at an event that's sponsored by a progressive Jewish group. As far as my ability to defeat Rodney Davis, I think that all one has to do is to look at the numbers. This is a tough district to win with a D after your name. And I ran for this seat in this district once before, back in 2012, and achieved success that no other Democrat has come even close to achieving. I lost that year by 0.3 percentage point to Rodney Davis, and that's a 0.3 with an asterisk. We also had a liberal independent on the ballot that year saying all the same things as me about all the issues, who took a little more than 7 points and split the vote just enough to allow Mr. Davis to escape to Washington as an accidental congressman. And subsequently, we've seen Hillary Clinton lost here by 15 times what I lost by. Senator Durbin lost by 20 times what I lost by. Other congressional candidates in the 2 cycles since then have lost by 50 to 60 times what I lost by. And I've asked myself for several years, how is it that I succeeded where Barack Obama lost and all these other people lost by such large margins? And I think that it goes back to biography for the most part. I had a less than comfortable upbringing. My father died as a young man at 37, and I was 13 at the time and had to start working then. So I felt some pain as a young person. And in the emergency department, I take care of a large number of people who have next to nothing. And I spend time with them and I share their pain. And I think Bill Clinton won elections by expressing the fact that I feel your pain. And I've made it clear to voters that I do feel their pain. I know their pain, I empathize with their pain. And in order to win this district, one has to swing the votes of tens of thousands of people. And I think to have that ability to empathize with them pays great dividends. Additionally, along the lines of what Professor Ebel says, I think you have to be an outsider in order to get these people over. And I've never been the favorite son of a Democratic Party that frowns on single-payer health care, and my outsider status benefits me greatly. So thank you again for having me here today.
Hi everyone, my name is Eric Jones. I was born and raised in Centralia, and I currently live in Edwardsville, Illinois with my two kids, a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, my wife. We've been married for about 8 years. And I mentioned Centralia because I'm just a guy from a small town, and I think that's going to be very relevant in this district. My mom's a school teacher for over 30 years, my dad's a small business owner, my grandparents are union members, and they taught me fairness and hard work, and that is what I brought to my entire career, and that's why I'm running for this position right now. So I've spent a good chunk of my career in public service. I am an attorney, and I've been an Illinois Assistant Attorney General, and I've also been an investigative counsel in the House Oversight Committee in Washington, and on the Senate Commerce Committee of the Chief Investigative Counsel. And in all those jobs, my role was to use the authority given to us by the people to take on problems, to build a record of that problem, find a solution, and then turn that solution into law. And I've done that repeatedly. I have a track record of doing that both in Springfield and in Washington on progressive values and on progressive issues for the last 15 years. And I think that's what separates me in this race. We're all going to talk about what we want to go do. I'm going to spend a lot of time telling you about what I've done. And I want to put my track record up against Rodney Davis's in this general election, and I think it's going to be a track record, and it's not going to go well for Rodney what I've done versus what he's been doing. Let me give you a few examples. I fought to make sure we got the ACA passed. I wanted to go further than we did, but I investigated insurance companies and built a record of what they were doing wrong. Where's Rodney been? He's been trying to repeal Obamacare repeatedly, and he's trying to hurt people across this district. And I will advocate for Medicare for all and for universal coverage. I fought on behalf of an open and free internet for net neutrality when I was in the Attorney General's office and when I was on the Senate Commerce Committee. Where's Rodney been? Rodney's been on the exact opposite side. He's sided with the cable companies, and he's taken that right away from all of us. I also fought on behalf of students who were trying to pay down their student loans when I was in the Attorney General's office, and we uncovered that student loan servicing companies were ripping off students by not helping them get their loans paid down. Where's Rodney been? He said nothing when the Department of Education rolled back those protections that we got put in place during the Obama administration. Finally, on big banks. I took on big banks here in Illinois and got a law passed that prevented them from taking advantage of Illinois workers who were being forced to use these things called payroll cards. Where's Rodney been? He's said nothing, and he's tried to take back the protections from the CFPB that we got put in place. On issue after issue after issue, I will be on the right side of these issues with people, and Rodney's been on the wrong side. And the last thing I want to say is Rodney talks a lot about how he grew up working at McDonald's. Well, I grew up working at Dairy Queen, and I can match him on that too. Thank you for having me.
Dirksen-Lonergan, thank you for having us today. We appreciate the opportunity. And you know, when it comes to how we're going to win against Rodney Davis, the first thing that I think that we have to do is take a lesson from 2016 and make sure that we are not leaving people out and we're not letting them feel left behind. And I have put, since I announced on July 5th, I've now put about 25,000 miles on my car getting around this 14-county district. For that reason, because if you're asking for the job of representative, then it's incumbent upon you, or it should be, to stand in front of people in every corner of the district and listen to their concerns. And I will continue to do that throughout this race and when elected to Congress. To win against Rodney, it's going to take some real deep roots to unseat him. I think that my fundraising shows exactly who I am. 80% of the money that I have raised comes from right here in Illinois. 60% of my donations are $100 and under. So what does that show? It shows that my roots in the district where I am born and raised, where I have spent my professional and personal life right here, that those roots are not just deep, but they are wide. We are not going to beat Rodney by Democratic votes alone. We have got to get people to come over the line and cross with us, and they will. And they will take that leap of faith for somebody who is also rooted in this district, who they know has invested their time and energy in the same place as them. Healthcare, education, and jobs affect everybody, whether you are a Democrat or you're a Republican. When Rodney stood on the White House lawn and threatened to take healthcare away from people, it didn't matter if they were a Democrat or Republican. He was taking it away from everyone. Healthcare is an overarching issue in this race, and it will continue to be as long as the Republicans, led by the likes of Rodney Davis, are chipping away at the protections that we have. There is not another candidate who will fight with more passion to protect our healthcare than I will. And in 2018, ladies, it is our year. We are organizing, and it is our year to get more representation in Congress.
Thank you very much. So whoever has the first question, feel free to come up to the microphone and go ahead and ask your question.
Hi. Hello. I don't mind shouting if I have to. On Wednesday afternoon, Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator Mike Lee, and Senator Chris Murphy introduced Senate Joint Resolution 54 in the U.S. Senate, invoking the War Powers Resolution of 1973 to end unauthorized U.S. participation in the Saudi war and blockade in Yemen that has created the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, according to the United Nations. More than 1 million cases of cholera, millions of human beings on the brink of famine. Since then, the bill has been co-sponsored by our Senator, Senator Dick Durbin, by Senator Elizabeth Warren, and by Senator Cory Booker. My question to you is, first of all, do you support Senate Joint Resolution 54? And will you be willing to issue a statement on behalf of your campaigns that you support Senate Joint Resolution 54? And when such legislation comes back to the House, as we expect, I should have said that because it's invoking the War Powers Resolution, it's forcing a debate and vote within 10 days. So after that happens, we expect there will be a resolution in the House. So when that happens in the House, my question is, will you call on Rodney Davis to support the House companion to Senate Joint Resolution 54? Will you publicly call on Rodney Davis to support the House companion to Senate Joint Resolution 54 to end U.S. participation, unauthorized U.S. participation in this catastrophic war? Thank you.
My answer to your first question is yes, absolutely, I would support Senate Joint Resolution 54. And for what it's worth, my campaign will be glad to offer a public statement to that effect. I'm not sure that the world is waiting with bated breath for what John Ebel wants to. Robert, yes, of course, I will gladly do that. And as well, we will certainly call on, I'll look at the camera now, we will call on Rodney Davis to get behind matching legislation in Congress, but I'm not sure that's going to do any good. I mean, the overarching problem with Rodney Davis is he doesn't give two shakes of a stick about what we think in this county and largely in this district. But what you're pointing to, Robert, is a larger problem of Congress's cowardice when it comes to overseeing and approving the use of military force by the United States overseas. Now, I mentioned that I'm a veteran. I don't know that anyone else on this stage or in this race can match me for experience working alongside those whose lives are being put at risk by these unauthorized conflicts. And if you send me to Congress, I will be a voice for those young men and women and for their families. And for the Constitution, as it turns out, we have not just a moral obligation, but a constitutional obligation as Congress to look at what our government, what the executive branch now wants to do overseas, and to call a vote on that, and to say yes or no. My vote won't always be no. I think there are appropriate times for the United States to use military force overseas, but we do, as Congress, need to be evaluating those situations on a case-by-case basis.
My answer to both questions is also a resounding yes. In fact, I would go further and state that I believe that we need to withdraw our troops from all of the Middle East. Years ago, in early 2003, January and February, I was among the people that were out there marching and protesting against the forthcoming invasion of Iraq and arguing about the dominoes that would then fall in place when we went and destabilized that region in that war for oil. And we didn't win our argument. Obviously, we went into Iraq and we have seen the chaos that myself and many other people predicted, and it reverberates to this day. I don't see what benefit will be achieved during year 18 in Afghanistan that hasn't been achieved in years 0 through 17. And so one of my heroes in Washington, D.C. is a congresswoman named Barbara Lee, who stood alone after 9/11 against the authorization of armed invasion of Afghanistan after 9/11 took place. And I think she was prescient, and I think she is guided by a conscience, and I think that she's a very wise woman. And I look forward to working beside her when I get to Washington. And not only does this endless warfare is it morally wrong and leave us with a lot of blood on our hands of both Americans and a far larger number of people overseas, it strips us of the needed money for social programs. Working in an emergency department, I'm at the very bottom of a safety net that has been shredded over the last 15 to 17 years, and I see the impact of this endless war on a regular basis. And so, yes, Robert, yes, and on similar measures, yes.
Well, going third, you're going to start hearing, I guess, maybe some of the same things. But thanks for the question. I see you back there. And yes to both. You know, I appreciate you bringing it up, and I think it's an important issue. But I want to talk a little bit about where I come from on these issues. And I've spoken about this on the campaign trail since the very beginning. I remember the first forum I did for Indivisible down in Collinsville back in, I think it was July or August. We got a question similar to this, and I walked everyone through my perspective on this issue. Congress has, I'm glad to see members of Congress stepping forward and saying Congress has a role to play on these issues on military force and what our country is doing overseas. And what I've talked about a lot is that after 9/11, there was a use of military force authorization that was passed, and it's ongoing, which has allowed the executive branch and the military to just continue with these actions overseas without Congress weighing in. And there have been a number of congressmen and senators who stepped forward and said, we need to weigh in on this again. This is our job. This is what the Constitution says we should be doing. So Senator Kaine and others, and I actually believe there are some Republicans involved in this too, who've said it's time for Congress to step forward again, and it's time for people to vote on these issues again. And so I would be very supportive as well, just on the broader issue, on bringing it back to Congress, so Congress has a say, so the people have a say, because right now we don't. And you know, I come from this issue from a few places. When I worked in Congress on the House Oversight Committee, this was after the Bush administration had taken us into Iraq, and we'd seen what kind of impacts that had on our country. And the committee spent a lot of time looking into waste, fraud, and abuse on what was happening overseas, and it was off the charts. We spent a number of years just documenting what was happening, and I won't ever forget that. And the harm that we're creating overseas has been, in many cases, much greater than the benefits. So thank you for your question.
Thank you for your question, Robert. And to both questions, yes, absolutely. And I'm proud of Senator Sanders for putting that forward and trying to shed some light on it. And I'm proud of Senator Durbin for signing on as a co-sponsor. And I'm proud that Senator Durbin was one of the voices who stood up back in '08 and voted against the Iraq War. And I'm very proud to have the endorsement of our senior Senator Dick Durbin in this race. I also believe that it is incumbent upon our representatives to be the check against the president that we are supposed to be. And that means doing this on a regular basis, not once or twice, but any time that we are considering military action. So right now, what are we doing? American planes are refueling the Saudi planes that are bombing Yemen. That's the reality of what we're doing right now. Who can tell me that that is not an act of war? It is. And our representatives have sat back and allowed it to happen without forcing the issue to the congressional floor, to bring it to the light of day so that all of us who have voted them into office can listen to the debate and understand what's going on, instead of letting these things happen, allowing them to happen, using our tax dollars to make them happen, covered in darkness and secrecy. I promise you that if you elect me to Congress, I will shed light, I will open doors to make sure that everyone who has cast a vote and those who haven't can see what is going on in Congress, where our money is going, where our military is being sent, and what our involvement is on a regular basis.
Okay, 2 quick notes. To give everyone more an equal opportunity to speak first and change the order around, the next question will be answered first by David Gill and then go along the line. So also it might work better if you have a question, raise your hand. I can walk around and give the microphone to you rather than have you wait in line. So I see a hand, so.
The 14 counties that you will be representing, one of you, hopefully, are largely rural. And I think that a lot of the reason for Trump getting elected and the left behind feeling that a lot of rural people had to do with lack of connectivity to the modern world. And I think that last I heard it was like 30% of America does not have access to fast internet. And this impacts education, impacts small business, impacts large business, it impacts healthcare, all kinds of things. Have you thought about, do you know what the situation is in these 14 counties? Have you thought about how you can impact that and improve that situation?
I've worked in many of the counties of this district and have gotten to know the people that live in Bond County and Madison County and DeWitt County, and you're exactly right. They feel left behind. They're left behind in many, many ways. There's upwards of 200,000 individuals in this district that don't have access to broadband internet, and it takes a toll. They're lacking so much more than that also. They're lacking meaningful, well-paying jobs that have been stripped out of this country with the trade deals that have been put in place by a Congress which is owned by corporate America. They're lacking appropriate health care. And that's why the platform that I support is about those individuals, because I see them on a regular basis. I talk with them on a regular basis. Not every emergency department visit, in fact, few are actual emergencies. The bulk of them are standard primary care, and one has time to interact and get to know what people's needs and wants are. And I support a platform that is backed by a couple of groups that grew out of Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign, Justice Democrats and Brand New Congress. And part of that platform is having a single-payer healthcare program now. That we can't afford to wait any longer with regards to that, with 100 people dying every day because they have the wrong insurance, so many of them in the little areas where I go to work. I support a $15 an hour minimum wage now, and then going up, adjusted to inflation, so that people no longer have to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week to try to make ends meet. And I support tuition-free access to public higher education and trade schools, because America is the land of the greatest social immobility in the developed world, and we deny people the opportunity to improve their lot in life when they have to face a mountain of debt. I believe that they should have no debt if they want to improve themselves. So it's a wonderful question, and those are the people who one needs to win over to win this election.
Before I answer this, can someone who's videoing this take this to Rodney and show him this isn't that hard to handle? It's really nice. I've seen the microphone go around. Thank you for your question. I think it's a really good one, and I want to tell you that this is an issue that I've been speaking about since day one of my campaign, because I think this is a critical issue to this district. And I would say I've probably been speaking about this issue probably more than anybody else in the country, frankly. And I come from a personal experience on it. I'm from a rural community originally. My wife's family is from Wayne County. They still live there now. I've seen what happens when you don't have access to basic internet in a home. And I can say this because I've been to my in-laws' home over and over again for the last decade. And when I worked remotely on these things that I've been telling you about, they don't have cell phone service at their home that works very well. They don't have basic high-speed internet. And so I would go work in the McDonald's parking lot to get on their Wi-Fi in Fairfield. Or I would go and maybe buy a cup of coffee. And I say that because there are students and there are people throughout this district who are dealing with that. There are 200,000 people who do not have access to basic high-speed internet. We have a digital economy. We have to get this fixed. And if if a member of Congress or a president fights to bring basic high-speed internet to someone's home, they don't care if it's Republican or Democrat, let me tell you, because I know a lot of Republicans who are very upset about this issue. And we've dealt with these issues in this country before. In the 1930s, the Roosevelt administration saw a similar problem with electrification. And we now take it for granted. But they created a program through the REA and the co-op system, and now everyone in this country has electricity. And when I talk about this, and I hear this perspective is, well, we can't get this done, it's just a matter of priorities. They just went through $1 trillion tax cut. You can't tell me we can't bring internet to every home in this country. We built the interstate system, we electrified this country, and it's time we bring internet to everybody. So I'm very passionate about this issue, and I would love to talk about it more afterwards. But thank you.
Thank you for your question. And we do, with the 14 counties, we do have a lot of rural space. We still have a digital divide in Champaign County, where there are people who, I know I have a friend who lives out in the rural part of Champaign County, and I get emails from her, usually at 3, 4 in the morning is when I see them come through, because that's when she can get through on dial-up. So it's everywhere. And again, it goes back to priorities and making sure that we are paying attention to all 14 counties. And again, that's another reason that I try to make sure that I get around and listen to people. And I can tell you that in some areas it is obviously a much bigger problem than in others. I was down in Elsa, Illinois. I don't know how many of you have been to Elsa. It's beautiful. And there are small business owners there who are struggling mightily because they have this woman, Julie, who owns a bed and breakfast in Elsa. And it's a beautiful bed and breakfast. She has a hard time letting people know when she has availability and marketing because the digital service is so poor. Now we have all of these opportunities for people to create small businesses in far-flung areas if we do this right and if we can get them connected. Our local economies are going to depend on it. They're going to depend on entrepreneurs and small businesses, and those small businesses depend on people elected in Congress to make sure that they are a priority and that we are extending broadband into every corner of the district. And as a representative, it will be a priority for me. Thank you.
I think I'm going to sound quite similar to what's already been said. I do think that what we need to be looking at is a kind of comprehensive plan for rural revitalization. What you point to is a symptom of a much broader problem where we've had a kind of gilding of the coasts in America, where there's a lot of wealth and connectivity and technology concentrated on our coasts and our big cities, and the rest of America, heartland America, is being left behind. And I would submit that we are not a strong nation if we are not strong in our heart. So we do need to be investing extensive resources in rural revitalization, whether it's bringing broadband to rural communities, although I would insist that that be net neutral broadband and not funded by which won't be so popular under the Trump administration. But I think we also need to be incentivizing the movement of professions and teachers into these rural communities through programs. I would advocate for scholarship programs, kind of like the ROTC program that I used to go to college, where someone who wants to be a teacher or a lawyer or a doctor, a nurse, a social worker, and commits themselves to working in an under-resourced community, be it rural or urban, can have their tuition covered. I think that's a good way for us to create the sort of incentives that we need to rebuild rural America. When it comes to the issue of telecom, it's not just an issue of can this community shop on Amazon, or can they put their listings up on gosh, what's it called? Airbnb. You can tell I don't use it all that often. But it's also, can they keep pace with 21st century agriculture, which is a wired or increasingly wireless agriculture. We think of agriculture in, I think, very mid-20th century terms, but if we're leaning forward into the 21st century, that connectivity is going to be really important for our farmers as well.
I'm interested in seeing the House as a body where the members talk to each other and cooperate to get things done, in spite of very strong opinions and views that are held by most of the people in that body. And if you were to go to the House, what would you do to foster that? Thank you.
That's a very good question, and thank you for asking that. We're all focused on a primary right now, so you're hearing from our perspectives on all these specific issues, but at the end of the day, what really matters is what we're going to go to do in Washington and what we're going to get done. And I'll tell you, what I would bring to that is my background and experience doing this work. In Illinois, we got through laws passed to protect small business owners from patent trolls, to protect senior citizens who were in nursing homes against abuse. We got done a bill to protect people against payroll cards, which I mentioned. Same in Washington, I worked on issues related to cybersecurity and on health insurance and on protecting people from billion-dollar scams. And I mentioned all of those things because every time we got something done, there were Republicans that were involved with us to get it done. And we have to remember that. And when we've seen in this country when things don't go the right way, it's when it's a partisan 100% bill, and then we see a flip back and forth. And I'm not suggesting, I've been involved in this long enough to know that I'm not naive on what we're up against, but I also know that the art of compromise is something that our Constitution calls for, and will always be something that we have to be working with. Let me just share a quick story on what I bring to that. When I was on the Senate Commerce Committee, we did an investigation where we found that there were $10 billion, that's with a B, of unauthorized charges on landline phone bills because of something called cramming. They'd allowed third-party billing to happen. They were unauthorized. We spent years doing it. We subpoenaed Verizon and AT&T. They finally copied the documents. We knew there was a huge problem. We forced the phone companies to do something differently. And then what we decided to talk to the chairman of the committee. We wanted to push through a bill that would also protect people on cell phones too, because we knew there was going to be a problem there. And because we were unwilling to compromise and we stuck with cell phones and landlines, we did not get a bill done on landlines. And so I'll tell you, and I took that lesson with me back to Springfield when I worked on issues here, and I'll just say, I've learned that we cannot let a perfect bill be the enemy of a good law. And that's what I'm going to take with me to Congress. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And I think Midwesterners are maybe well positioned to bring a little bit of our Midwestern decency out to Washington. And on a personal level, well, actually on a professional level, I spent the last 7.5 years working to protect and promote the legacy of President Abraham Lincoln. And I did that with a lot of passion because I believe in him. And I very openly say that my two political mentors are Senator Dick Durbin and President Abraham Lincoln. And I think that being born and raised in a place like Springfield, going to school here at U of I, and then raising my own family in Springfield, you don't choose your friends or your family by political party. And it's how you function on a daily basis. And I think some of that willingness to engage with people on a human level has got to be taken out to Washington. And when I talk about our healthcare story with our family, you know, nobody, when they're in the hospital with someone they love who is ill, cares if the doctor or nurse treating them is Democrat or Republican. When the bills start coming in and you're terrified if you're going to be able to pay the next one, it doesn't matter who is a Democrat or Republican. Those things affect all of us. And I think if we can approach people in a human level and focus on the issues that each of us care about, despite party, healthcare, jobs, education, it opens us up to move forward together.
As I've been traveling around the 13th district, I have heard a lot of agreement from people on both sides of the aisle about things that they're concerned about. And they are, as Betsy indicates, education, healthcare, jobs, infrastructure. Nobody loves a pothole. And I think that we do spend a lot of time focusing on what it is that divides us. And let's face it, if we can all get through Thanksgiving dinner with our family members who have different political opinions, we should be able to do something similar in Washington. The endorsement that I have received that makes me really proud is from a group called With Honor. With Honor is a group of folks, mostly veterans, who are trying to bring more veterans into Congress. We are now at a historic low in the percentage of veterans in Congress, around 19%. And the idea behind With Honor, they're endorsing candidates on both sides of the aisle, is that by putting people who have the shared experience of military service into Congress, they're providing sort of a foundation for bipartisan cooperation going forward. And that's based on experience. It's based on my experience in the Navy as an intelligence officer. There were people who were working with me whose politics were so far to the right that I couldn't see them. They were way over there. And yet, we needed to make sure that the men and women who were going off the end of the aircraft carrier had every bit of information that they needed to make sure they would come back safely. And when we were working together in Korea, it didn't matter, Republican, Democrat, third party, whatever, we all had to work together to make sure that our commanders had the best sense of the context against which to make judgments about North Korean activity. So I've done this. I've done this bipartisan working thing. I have the endorsement of With Honor. I'm proud of that, and I would be happy to live up to the pledge that I've signed in Congress. Thank you.
It's a great question. In the emergency department, I work with a number of other doctors in different hospitals, and it's my misfortune that many of them are Republican because they don't support me financially in my political aspirations. But we do get along very collegially, and I'm able to work with Republicans in that setting. And I'd be glad to work with Republicans in Congress if they had projects which would do good things for the vast majority of the American people. But I might be left waiting a long time for something like that. I really think that ultimately there's a bit of a sham, a bit of theater here, because while there is tremendous fighting across the aisle on a large number of social issues, ultimately, and I say this as a lifelong FDR Democrat, ultimately both parties, with corporate dollars backing them, have worked together to make sure that appropriate health care is denied the American people, that appropriate access to well-paying jobs and higher education is denied to the American people, and that these endless wars that make life so hard for all of us go on and on. You know, my lifelong Democratic Party changed back there in the late 70s to mid 80s when they decided that if we can't beat them, let's join them. And they began to take that corporate cash as well. Still a far better party than the opposition as far as I'm concerned, especially when you look at those social issues. But we have fallen victim in the same way. We let the arms manufacturers buy us off. We let the oil and gas companies buy us off. We let the health insurers buy us off. We have a pair of US senators who take money from health insurance companies and they stand against Bernie Sanders' single payer bill. And so I think if we want to change these things, we need to send people to Washington who are outside that sphere, who will not knuckle under to pressure from party leadership. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Jenny Putman, an Urbana voter, and I'm a gun sense voter, as you can see on my shirt. I know that all four of you are also gun sense voters, and I appreciate you being at the rally in Springfield the other day, being at our vigil on the anniversary of Sandy Hook. Thank you for being gun-sensible voters. Can you tell us what you would do as a gun-sensible, effective member of Congress?
Sure. Thank you for the question. It is on all of our minds right now. And I was in Springfield with Moms Demand Action yesterday, working with them on quite a few issues, and one being the March for Our Lives on the 24th. You know, the first thing that we have to do is make sure that we are electing people who are serious about making change. Because there's changes that we can make immediately. We can achieve universal background checks across the board. We can do that. We can keep guns out of the hands of violent offenders, domestic abusers, dangerously mentally ill. We can do that. We can keep military weapons out of the hands of civilians. We can do that with the right representation. And we've got to unleash the power of the Center for Disease Control right, we have got to do that. And it's going to take the right people in office to make sure that we allow them to do it, that we fully fund their study, to study gun violence as a public health crisis, because that's what it is. The Center for Disease Control has figured out a lot of issues through the years. They're the ones who figured out that aspirin in children was causing Ray's syndrome when they had fevers. They did that by digging down and studying the data. And with gun violence, if we unleash the power of the CDC, we can figure out some root causes, and we can figure out some actionable steps that we can all get behind moving forward. And we have got to elect representatives who will stand up to the NRA. It's nothing but an agent of sales. All they care about is gun sales. And the last thing we need is more people like Rodney Davis who use their federal overreach to pass something out of the House like concealed carry reciprocity, which nobody in Illinois that I've ever heard of wants.
Jenny, when it comes to standing up to the NRA, I will do that forcefully. I've said from the first day of this campaign that I look forward to earning their F. To me, that's a moral A+, and I will work every day to get that F. And as someone who's spent most of his career in academia, that's something. You know, I do care about grades. But the policies that I would pursue to earn that F have to do with the ban on semi-automatic weapons. The fact that we haven't been able to get bump stocks banned at this point is atrocious to me. That's something that we should be working on. I want to see universal background checks on the purchase of guns, but also on the purchase of ammunition. We do have 300 million firearms circulating in our society right now. So there's a kind of latent problem there that we can't do much about if we are not following where ammunition is going. So that's something that I would like to see done. I also think that as a nation, we need to have a conversation about the really dangerous intersection between handgun ownership and suicide. Fully 2/3 of the gun deaths that happen in America every year, so 22,000, are self-inflicted gunshot wounds. And I want us to engage in a national scale education campaign about that, maybe similar to something that we saw as people were becoming aware of the harmful effects of cigarette smoke. That we can get smarter on this, and we can let people know that even though the Second Amendment is the law of the land, it doesn't have to be the law of their home. And if there's someone in their home who is suffering from clinical depression and there is a handgun, they can take that gun away. So that's another thing that I think that we can do, Jenny, to really confront this, this gun violence crisis. But Betsy is also absolutely right. If we don't have the CDC researching these problems, we're going into a really complex set of problems done, and that's no way to do it.
This is about the 15th time that we've had one of these forums across the district, and so I've gotten to know my competition very well. I can do their lines for you. Should one of them beat me on March 20th, I look forward to traveling and speaking on their behalf. In fact, let me say publicly, I will support them wholeheartedly. Very bright, thoughtful, and hardworking people these are. And we don't always agree on each and every issue. I think that we have some important policy differences, but this is one issue where I can't find any daylight, frankly. I will say, Jenny, that I am glad you were out there Wednesday morning. I went there. I almost didn't go. I was exhausted. I'd been out Tuesday night with the GEO. I stand with those graduate students, and I was pleased to be out there Tuesday night. Solidarity. And I went Wednesday morning and began to cry, and Jenny supported me by giving me a very welcome hug, because I was listening to the mother of one of the young people that was slain at Northern Illinois University 10 years ago. And I cry in the emergency department as well, because this is an issue that is on my mind every day when I go into work, because not infrequently we see the victims of gun violence in the emergency department. And it is gut-wrenching to have to look a mom in the eyes and tell her that her young one has been shot to death. And that sticks with you, and that drives you. And that's why I have a passion for working toward the reforms that we're talking about, and why I will never cave. I will never take $1 from the NRA. I will guarantee UNF every year, ban the assault weapons, national gun registry, mandatory background checks, no loopholes, no exceptions. There's nothing that will be talked about here that I don't support.
Going forth on this issue, I think you're gonna hear me echo what the others have said. I couldn't agree more with everything else that we've set up here. And it's actually nice that we're, I think, all coming at this issue from the same place, because we really do need solidarity on this, and we need to be pushing as hard as we possibly can. A couple things I want to add. It's very important that we react to the mass shootings that occur, but we also cannot forget that gun violence is a daily problem in this country. And it means that we can't just be reacting when we hear a national news story, but we need to be on this issue on a daily basis. And so, just so you know, I get to Congress, I will fight on this issue every day. I've said the only special interest I'm going to work with on this issue is Moms Demand Action. I have said I think we're all on the same page on this. I will never accept any money from the NRA. And on all these issues, on the fact that they're trying to push reciprocity through, which they seem to like states' rights when it suits them, and they seem to be against them when it doesn't. It doesn't? So, I think Illinois gets to decide what its concealed carry law should be, and we got forced into doing it anyway from a Supreme Court decision. And the fact that they're now trying to force us to swallow somebody else's concealed carry law is ridiculous. I'm also, let's ban bump stocks immediately. Let's ban assault rifles and military-grade weapons. Let's get universal background check done. The list goes on. The key for this issue is we've got to just start winning these elections again, to get people in Congress who will make the right decisions and will actually vote for students and for children instead of for the gun lobby. And the one thing I want to close on this issue with is we are facing special interests on all of these issues. At the end of the day, that is what is stopping us from getting anything done, whether it's on climate change, on insurance, on healthcare, It's the special interests that are there in Washington. The gun lobby is like the others, and I've been taking on these special interests throughout my career, and I'm ready to go do that as a member of Congress.
I've been to 2 forums now, and I know that I will enthusiastically support whichever one of you wins. I also know it's not just your position on issues, it's your leadership style and stamina that's going to be essential in this Congress. And when one of you gets sworn in, that's only 10 months from now, I want to have a sense of how you're going to approach the issues of choosing a caucus leadership, of voting on legislation, and maybe even on impeachment. So as you approach your role in Congress, how do you see in the first few months you're beginning to exercise leadership right away?
I'm really glad that you framed the question of leadership here. We have been sorely missing leadership from our representative in this district, who has shown nothing but followership, really, for visibility. And I'm glad that you brought up the question of leadership also, because coming from a Navy background, I believe that when a ship runs aground, or there's a major mishap, that the commanding officer of that ship should be relieved. It's kind of complete responsibility for the ship. I'm sure you're all familiar with that principle. We had the Democratic Party's ship run aground in 2016, after it ran aground in 2014. And I think that is well past time that we started to look for new leadership for our party in the House and in the Senate. So if you vote for me, I will be voting for new leadership for House Democrats, and I would be cheering for new leadership for the Senate Democrats. That wouldn't fall under my purview. You asked too about
legislation and impeachment.
Oh, I mean, we have a self-impeaching president. I would want to see the articles, but at this point, there is so much smoke that there is almost surely fire on a number of different things. I mean, it's the emoluments clause that's the one that I think he's most clearly in violation of. But as bad as Mike Pence would be as president, I think he would be plenty bad. I think he's not as bad, as erratic as the guy who's in there right now. So I would be voting to impeach most likely also. Was there another part of the question?
Well, more generally, how you're going to help provide leadership in the House.
By standing up for what I believe in, which I think many people in Congress just don't do.
Another great question. I learned a lot. I went to work back in 2013 as the Assistant Director of the Illinois Department of Public Health at a time when we were developing and implementing the rollout of Obamacare here in Illinois. And so I've known the nuts and bolts of healthcare financing as the president of the board of a hospital in Clinton, Illinois. I know healthcare inside out, but I learned more governmental bureaucracy during my time at IDPH than perhaps I wanted to learn. And I think that it allowed me to have some sense of what's important in leadership. And I assuredly would look for new leadership within the Democratic Party. I've been running against Nancy Pelosi for some time now. I had to defeat the hand-chosen Democratic candidate in the primary of 2012 and did so in spite of being outspent 5-1. And then, in spite of my success that year, my message winning by 7 points, they wanted to go in another direction, which understandable, but after they lost by 50 times what I lost by, they still had no interest in this single-paying supporting doctor. And so she's not somebody who sees eye to eye with me on issues. And so I would welcome new leadership within our party. As far as my being a leader, I talk all the time about the need for a healthcare champion in Washington, D.C. You can count on 2 fingers the number of progressive practicing physicians. And single payer is coming, and it's coming like a train of fire. Because when I joined the Physicians for a National Health Program 25 years ago, an advocacy group of single payer supporting doctors. Support was at 20% for single payer. It's now at 60% and growing every day. And it's just looking for that one last step. And I look forward to being a champion and speaking against the myths against single payer and telling the stories. I've got 1,000 stories I can tell you about people that suffer and die because we don't have single payer.
Thank you for your question. It's a very good one. First off, on leadership in Washington, on who's there now, we need new leadership. The House needs new leadership. I think a lot of people agree on that issue. As far as the leadership I will bring, you mentioned impeachment, you mentioned Donald Trump. Let me talk about my background and what I'm bringing to this. I actually think I'm the only person in the entire country running for Congress this year who has actually conducted congressional oversight and who has run congressional investigations. And I want to tell you, I will be ready to do that job on day one in Washington, and we need people who can do that job. Because we're all talking about all these issues that we want to get through, and I am supportive of getting all of this done. But we have to accept what we're going to deal with in 2019 when we get to Congress. Donald Trump or Mike Pence will still be president, one of them. But we will have somebody in charge of the EPA who does not believe in climate change. We're going to have somebody in charge of the Department of Education who does not believe in public education. We've got our own president calling his Department of Justice the deep state. The House is on fire in Washington, and we need firefighters. And I've been fighting these fires throughout my career, and I am ready to go do it on day one. Congressional oversight is an incredibly important role. And given what our president is doing, and impeachment, by the way, is not just going to happen. It's going to take us getting the House back and actually building a record. And we cannot forget that what Mueller is doing right now at the Department of Justice is a criminal investigation. Congress has a role to play. And if I can get there, one, I will push for a committee on Russian interference in our election, which we should have. Congress should convene a committee in both the House and the Senate with subpoena power to actually uncover what happened. Yep. And Congress should be uncovering what happened with the Trump administration and what role it's playing. And right now, we've seen Republicans, we've seen Nunes do this on the Intel Committee. We've seen them stop the investigations from proceeding. And I promise you, we get this House back, Adam Schiff will become chairman of the House Intel Committee. He will get to the bottom of it, and you're going to see me on the dais at these hearings asking tough questions of Trump officials. I promise you that. Trump officials.
You know, when I go to Washington to represent the 13th District, it is not me by myself. It is all of us represented by one person. So whoever is elected on in November of 2018 is not standing alone. We will be taking the force of the 13th District to Washington with us. And that's important because that is a loud, powerful voice. Now, Rodney Davis has not been using his voice for us. And I talk a lot about it in our commercials, in our media, and when I move around the district. We have to have a representative who stands up to Donald Trump in big ways and in small, because words matter. Every time Donald Trump makes a racist remark, Rodney Davis stays silent. Every time Donald Trump makes a sexist remark, Rodney Davis stays silent. When Donald Trump makes a tweet that is sending dangerous ripples across the world, Rodney Davis stays silent. What I promise you is that I will do exactly what I've been saying I will do, and that is to go to Washington, represent our district, and stand up to Donald Trump and the likes of him, and call him out and be a check on that horrible, divisive voice. And when it comes to leadership within Congress, and I think you asked about the caucuses. You know, there's a great New Dems caucus, there's a great Problem Solvers caucus. I mean, so there's good ways to go, but what I'm going to tell you is, I was in Washington, D.C., and I was in a room full of congressional candidates, Democrats from around the nation. And what I saw was at least 50% women. I saw people of all ages and all colors. All I knew is, in 2018, if we elect that group of people to Congress, it is going to rock our world in the best possible way.
Hi, my name is Emily Rodriguez. I am interested in this line of questioning on the state of the party, and one key issue that I want to continue this line with is on immigration. This has largely been viewed as kind of like a referendum on the direction of our party and what we'll prioritize. And in Champaign County alone, we know that we have an estimated 11,000 undocumented immigrants. So I want to kind of frame this or use our own senator, Senator Durbin, as an example of this, right? To demonstrate how all over the board we seem to be as a party on this issue. Senator Durbin has called this the civil rights issue of our time, something that I deeply agree with. But also, we know that Senator Durbin also advised as a strategy to fold or to give our votes to a continuing budget resolution in order, rather than leveraging for a solution on DACA. So I'm interested, with the example of Senator Durbin, to revisit that decision that he made. Would you have agreed with that? And then second, just broadly, what would be your priority for an immigration deal?
It's good to see you, Emily. Working in the emergency department brings me great joy because we don't care where you're from. We don't care what your skin looks like or how old you are or how much money you have or what religion you are. And so I work in this terrific environment in which everyone is a human being, and I'm allowed to treasure them and cherish them and provide them with care as much as I want, with no one lording over me or telling me otherwise. And as an outsider with regards to this party, I agree with you. There are a lot of issues within our party, and this is one. And no, I don't agree with that decision with regards to the continuing budget resolution. I think that the dreamers are to be cherished and loved and stood up for and not sat down for. And I think that we as a party made a mistake and sat down. And again, Nancy Pelosi won't be telling me what to do because we are not on the same page as each other. And so I believe that we need a Clean Dream Act. I was out there marching for it, about a month ago on a Saturday morning here in Champaign, and I was proud to be out there, and I was really happy to see a whole lot of people out there with me marching for that. I believe that we need, a lot of people say comprehensive immigration reform. I think we need compassionate immigration reform, and that we need to treat these people as our brothers and sisters, because ultimately that is what they are. And this talk of increased border security, which is how I met you, Emily, not something I stand for, not something I've ever stood for. We've had a net negative movement of individuals across our border over the last 7 years. It's a specious discussion to even be having, and it's a discussion that's just based in bigotry. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Emily. It's a really good one and a very important one. And now that we've seen how this has played out, it's very clear that the decision that was made to take DACA off the table was a mistake. And so I would not have been supportive of it. Because we had an opportunity to force a vote on that, and we did not do it. And now we're fast approaching the deadline when people are going to be affected by this on a daily basis. And we have very little we can do at this point to have an impact, given that we've already voted on that. And so I think you raised a very good point. And you know, we did a forum here, I think just about a week ago, and I mentioned this, so some of you might have heard this already if you were here, but it's important to talk about what we're actually going to be doing on this issue if we don't solve this. We're talking about people who've been living here their entire lives, who've gone to school here, who have jobs here, and we're talking about sending them to places that they don't know, where they know no one, and they don't know the language. What kind of a country are we living in if that is what we are willing to do? So this is a moral issue, and this isn't something we should be compromising on at all. It's not something we should be using to sort of, oh, we can get more here, maybe in the budget if we sort of say we won't do this one right now. I don't think that's where we should be on this at all. And so I'm very hopeful, although I'm beginning to become more cynical about this, that this will get done before we arrive in Congress. It needs to, it has to. And I was hopeful that we would see some progress in the Senate last week, a couple weeks ago. We haven't. And so I would be a strong advocate to just hold everything up to get this thing done at this point, because it's clear to me that that's not going to happen, and I'm not seeing enough Republicans come forward and say they'll vote on it. There are Republicans and Democrats who want to get this done, but it's hardliners who are preventing it, including the president himself, who continues to move around on this issue and cause trouble for everyone. So I'm running out of time, but the last thing is I'm very supportive of immigration reform. We need to get this done. There are Republicans and Democrats who want to get it done. It's just time we send people to Washington who will do it.
Question. You know, and I too want a clean DACA bill, and when we talk about immigration reform, I think at the last forum we addressed this a little bit, that when we're talking about border security, that it should in no way be concentrated or assumed that we're only talking about our southern border, because we have a lot of open coastlines, and we have a vast border in Canada, and there are issues of human trafficking and drugs that are getting into our border because we're paying too much attention and take to the southern border, and while our eye is on the ball there, it is off the ball in other places. So we do need to address that in a comprehensive fashion. And in terms of the continuing budget resolution, I don't know what I would do. What I am going to do is I am going to push back a little bit and say that there has not been another senator who has been more devoted to protecting the rights of immigrants than Senator Dick Durbin. We wouldn't have Dreamers if it wasn't for Senator Dick Durbin. He has been at the forefront of immigration and immigration reform and protecting them for so long. It is his life's mission. And so I am pushing back a little bit on that. And from an outside perspective, as an armchair quarterback, it looks like, no, I wouldn't have voted for it. But I'm going to give him the benefit. I think he's earned it, that maybe he made the right decision for the moment. That's the best that I can do with that one. And and I too am affected on a regular basis as I move around the district by Dreamers who I think have incredible courage to come to rallies, to speak up, and I want to be somebody in Congress who is putting them at the forefront of my thought and protecting them.
No person, no legislator is going to be perfect, and I do think that we need to allow our leaders to learn and grow as they understand problems more thoroughly. I do think, though, that if Mitch McConnell or Paul Ryan or Donald Trump approaches you with a deal, it's good to think twice about whether they're going to live up to the terms of that deal. And I think that was a miscalculation. And in the moment, I think you can go back and look at an article in WILL or the News Gazette or one of the outlets here. I said that I was upset that they had passed the continuing resolution. I think that they should have held their ground and gotten that thing done, because the world is complicated. Issues come flying at these senators and Congress people 100 a minute, and that was a moment of clarity when something could have been achieved. I feel called as a candidate and would as a congressperson to welcome the stranger. I mean, we were all, as they say, once strangers in a strange land. My grandparents were refugees from Hitler. They came here in 1937, and they were allowed to prosper and start a family and restart their careers, having lost everything on the other side of the Atlantic. I want that opportunity to be there for those who are circulating among us now without the proper documentation. Back in 1986, our then president, Ronald Reagan, offered legalization or amnesty to something on the order of 2 million undocumented people in the United States. If Ronald Reagan can figure out how to do that, I think that we should be able to figure out how to do it now as well. So I would like to see the conversation shift from border security to dealing with the really compromised status that our friends and neighbors and co-workers have if they don't happen to have the right papers. So that's something that I will fight for in Congress.
It's nice that we're in the area of kind of basic human decency and respect for people. We have a climate right now where we have really some serious problems in the country, and yet people are excusing a whole range of indiscretions and voting for people who want to dismantle the social services that are allowing them to kind of stay where they're at right now, in the name of deciding who can, for example, use what bathroom. And so I'm wondering how we can really get the discussion turned to real issues, settle these issues of like what people are allowed to do in their bedrooms or what bathroom they can use, and really get the national conversation turned on what matters. So I'm curious, when we keep seeing things like what happened in North Carolina, when Mike Pence was governor of Indiana, things like that, how can we really get the conversation turned to meaningful issues and get people to be voting for people on meaningful issues and not what people they don't know are doing?
Can you, if you don't mind, because I'm not first, are there specific issues you're referring to that you'd like to see addressed?
Well, at some basic level, just LGBTQ issues, why are these even questions?
Why are they, right.
How can we, getting to the point where it's just everybody is everybody?
Yeah, no. I like that line. Everybody is everybody. I mean, that sums it up. I'm a strong supporter of LGBTQ rights, and it's really, I appreciate your question, and thanks for bringing that up. We have a lot of people in this country who are in positions of power who are trying to divide us, who are attacking certain groups of people for no reason. And we're talking about what happened with Mike Pence in Indiana, what he was doing as governor. They're about to run him out of town. He was actually lucky he got to become vice president, because I don't think it was going very well for him as governor. And I think what we're going to continue doing is educating our own children and having an impact in our daily lives, and saying as individuals and culturally that we're not okay with that kind of conduct. And I think I honestly think that is where the leadership's going to come from, and that's how we're going to have an impact in Washington. And on a lot of these issues, I think it's the same. The leadership is going to come from you all and from us, from jumping in and saying enough is enough and we're not going to tolerate this kind of conduct anymore. And then we're going to see members of Congress and politicians react to that. And so what I will be doing is conducting myself in a way that I will be proud of, that my children will be proud of, and that we'll show them how we're going to operate. And we're not going to allow discrimination against anybody for any reason. And we made some progress in the last administration with the vote on marriage equality in the Supreme Court. And I'm hopeful that as a people, we will continue to make that progress through events like this and through these open discussions. But we're going to have to get a lot of these people out of office. I mean, frankly, that's part of what the issue is. They keep pushing an agenda that a lot of the American people don't agree with. So thank you for your question.
Thank you for your question. And I'll actually take just a moment to compliment all the gentlemen that I am running against. We have repeatedly, all four of us, we've been on the campaign trail now together for a long time, and we have all received the feedback from people who have been at the forums that they very much appreciate how respectful everyone is to one another on stage. And I think that And in terms of how we're going to change the dialogue, I think one thing that is really important is, first of all, as Democrats, to make sure that we are not turning on each other. That we are not becoming the single issue person who, because a Democrat doesn't agree with us on one issue, we're going to tank the whole thing. We can't do that. We have to be better than that. We have to come together. And we have to do that. How do we bring in some of these people? We were talking about, swing voters earlier. And I can tell you that when I get around the district and I'm listening to people, keeping the dialogue on healthcare, jobs, and education is really important, because it's not that somebody may not care about what's happening right now with the Science Advisory Board with the EPA, right? It's not that they don't care. It's that they're really trying to figure out if they can afford groceries for the week, or if they have to put gas in their car, or if they have a child care bill they have to pay. We have to recognize what people are facing on a daily basis in their lives to turn their lights on and feed their children.
This issue of LGBTQ rights is one of the reasons that I'm a progressive. And I can say that when I was in college between 1988 and 1993, that it was the climate for my friends who were homosexual was really a lot more hostile. That we have come as a nation, as a country, a long, long way in terms of providing resources and legal protections and just general acceptance for the LGBTQ community. And I think that we should stop and acknowledge that and be proud of it at the same time that we acknowledge that we also have a long, long way to go, and that those voices that you're referring to are voices for injustice. This is a question of justice, and that you should look as voters for people who encapsulate your values, who express your values, but also who live them. I think I'm the only person in this primary, and if I'm running against Rodney Davis, I know I will be the only person who's ever officiated a same-sex marriage. And so for me, this is not just something that I talk about. It's something that I do and support. My campaign employs a lesbian as our treasurer. So we are implementing equal rights and equal access as we talk about them on the campaign trail, and I'm quite proud of that. So on the issue of transgender access to bathrooms, it does seem to me like it's something of a red herring that that the Republicans like to do to sort of motivate their base, but we as a party need to be very clear that this is not that. It is an issue of justice and will remain that until it's resolved.
I want this one. I think it's a great question for an event that's put on by Bend the Arc, because I assume that the name makes reference to the quote that the arc of history bends toward justice. But I like that it's called Bend the Arc because I'm a believer that it doesn't just happen, that we can push, we can help bend the arc toward justice. I'm a 24-year card-carrying member of the American Civil Liberties Union. And so when I see discrimination in any of its ugly forms, I stand up and I call that out. And I ran for office many years ago against Tim Johnson. And it was at a time when marriage equality was extremely unpopular. And these things change in a hurry, but it was 10% of Americans supported it. And I stood up on behalf of marriage equality because it was right. And because it takes, I have a certain political courage, if you will, to do what's right. My campaign also has a very diverse staff, young people from all over the country, lots and lots of females on staff, and I'm proud of that. I think that if you were asking how do we get past those things, ultimately I think that you have to go and talk to those who disagree with you and let them know that you're not some sort of scary monster. And I've had that opportunity by working and campaigning in these many different counties of the district, and I think that they've come to set aside their concerns with my support of marriage equality because they've come to recognize that, oh, he actually cares about me. He gets that both parties are owned by big corporations. He says that. And so if you can talk to them, meet them on the places where you can meet them and let them know that that's not a reason for them to turn their backs on you, your support of gay marriage, I think you can succeed politically.
All right, we only have time for one more question, so I appreciate everyone's participation, and thank you.
Hi, my name is Cindy Shepard, and I would like to know, in the last year and a few months, we've been hit by so many fast-moving and critical issues, gun control, Me Too, immigration, and DACA, and all, they just come at us, and yet underneath all of those crises is the slow-moving environmental crisis that has happened since at the federal level we have gone backwards, and by leaving the Paris Climate Accord and gutting the clean air power plan. So I'd like to know how you would approach moving us back in a direction that protects our earth, our land, and our air for future generations, so that we indeed will have health and education that's worth having.
Thank you for the question. And it starts with electing people who believe that climate change is real and that science has value. That's number one. And it is an overarching issue. You know, I believe that clean water, clean air, and land are basic human rights. And how do we fight against an administration who believes otherwise? And it is about changing representation and making sure that we have people in the room who are going to make different choices. And it's also about paying attention to the details and making sure that when Rodney Davis votes to roll back protections, that people are calling him out on it. And when Donald Trump is changing the rules around the EPA Science Advisory Board, which is ridiculous. He's trying to basically create a board that is supposed to produce facts by which policy is then based for the EPA. He's trying to change that board so it's all paid scientists who are paid by private corporations, instead of scientists who are who receive government funding and who are unbiased in their opinion. He's trying to change the facts on which policy is based. Paying attention to details like that is really important. And what I can promise you is that as an elected member of Congress, I will not only fight back, because that I will do, I will be paying attention to the devil in the details.
You're once again going to hear a lot of agreement up on the stage here on this issue. And I want to say that I know that I have signed, and I think David has signed too, the Off Fossil Fuels Pledge, something that's being circulated by Tulsi Gabbard and those who support her, to move our country away from its really ruinous addiction to fossil fuels and lean forward into the green and renewable economy. And I think one of the things that has made it hard for us to implement policy along those lines is that maybe as a party we haven't been making the economic argument strongly, forcefully enough. That this is not just, I mean, it is obviously importantly about protecting the world that we inhabit. We don't have another one of these. But it is also about stimulating economic growth. If we don't lean forward into this new energy economy, we're going to be left behind. We're already being left behind. So it's good for our economy. It is also good for municipal governments and state governments who can budget, if we're able to get the infrastructure in place to take advantage of solar and wind, who can benefit from an entirely predictable bottom line when it comes to expenditures on energy. As far as I know, that sunlight isn't going to cost more in 20 years than it costs now. Wind isn't going to cost more. But fossil fuels, you can be sure, are going to, as a limited resource. So if we start to make that argument more forcefully, I think that we can make some good progress. I mean, the process has already begun. What one might refer to as the creative destruction of the fossil fuel industry is already at hand. And the question for us is whether we're going to be out in front of that, or alongside it at least, or we're going to be left behind wondering what exactly we should do.
There's not much disagreement here. I've been saying great question to every question, but this is the greatest of questions. I say on the campaign trail all the time that this is the #1 issue of all. It dwarfs all the other issues, frankly, because as we move toward losing on this issue, we move to a point of no longer having human civilization in a century or 2.5 centuries, and there won't be humans around to fight about healthcare or immigration or women's rights or any of the other things that we're all talking about when we talk about justice. And so we need to move aggressively on this. We need to move fast. We are near the point of irreversibility right now, and we've had ample warning. Scientists have been talking about this for 30 plus years. It's been real science over that time. I took a lot of science classes here at the University of Illinois. I got my degree in mathematics and then stayed here for medical school. I know science. I'm a member of the Union of Concerned Scientists, and this is doable. This is more than doable, as John alluded to. It's being done at the city level. Many municipalities have committed to 100% renewables. Lawsuits are now being filed, a la the Philip Morris lawsuits back in the 90s. And many organizations are starting forth with divestment of resources from the fossil fuel industry. And it's about time that Congress got up and followed. And as John said, again, you looked at my notes, Professor Ebel, didn't you? I'm teasing. Outstanding for our economy when we finally make a full-throated effort toward this. Hundreds of thousands of jobs to be had. It's just the opposite of what the opposition states it is. The price is going down, down, down every year with regards to renewables. And we can do this, and we'll do it when we have the political will and the people in office that have the will.
Thank you for your question. I completely agree with the significance you're placing on this issue. I think it is the #1 issue we're facing. And I've spent a good chunk of my career working on these issues, and I'm proud to let you know that I've been endorsed both by the League of Conservation Voters and by the Sierra Club for the work that I've done on the environment in my career. I think I'm one of there's only a couple of us in the whole country who've been endorsed by both organizations, and I'm proud to have their support. And I have it from the work that I did on the House Oversight Committee, investigating the Bush administration on their attempts to derail our efforts as a government to address climate change, and on the fact that the president himself overturned EPA scientists. On one issue, we uncovered that there's something called the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, which are put out to control our ozone levels. And the EPA scientists spent a number of years doing what they do, and investigating, finding the facts, coming up with a solution. They proposed a certain standard. The president himself overturned that standard and did one that was not as protective of people. And in that entire investigation, I never uncovered any evidence to show that the president had any idea about ozone max, but he interfered. We also uncovered that the president interfered, and the oil and gas executives in the White House were editing climate change reports and crossing out the words climate change and putting in something else. It's a politicization of science. I spent a number of years working with Henry Waxman on these issues. And when I get to Congress, I will be a leader fighting against what we're seeing at the EPA and at NOAA and other agencies that have an important environmental mandate and mission that are being dismantled by our current president and the cronies he's put in charge. And so I will be a fierce advocate for the environment the first couple years when we're just doing oversight to slow things down, and then once we get the presidency back, I will be all on board on doing something about climate change. I was part of the initial effort on cap and trade, and I will be part of it again. Thank you.